And I hope this video helps in some way to understand the structures. And then we can talk about hands and feet and foreshortening. So here we go.
Hi everyone, it's Gury. I'd like to talk today about the arms and legs in the figure and some very practical ways of drawing them. We've talked about in the past the finding the plumb lines, the balances in figures. Just want to get a very straight vertical plumb through the figure. And we've talked about laying out the forms of the figure along this structure, which helps us get our proportions, our halfway point, all the important elements that we need in the overall structure of the figure. One of the important things about the limbs is that, like the gestures in the figure, and if I just do a generalized gesture drawing of a figure, the limbs, arms and legs, carry the same kind of fluidity and S-curves that the figure carries as a whole unit, as a whole gesture. So individually, they also have the kinds of S-curves that we've talked about in the figure as a whole. Everything is an S-curve. And this comes from the bones and muscles. It also is visual. So is it visual or medical? It's both. And understanding that in a very practical, sensible way is important. Starting with the general layout of the figure, doing a light sketch of the contrapposto of the torso. This is the pelvic block. And from this, we will find the movements of the arms. And then from that, the legs continuing on in an S-curve, and we'll talk about the legs in just a moment. The hand and the arm extend to about mid-thigh, so that we find the length of the arm, we've talked about proportions before, equal from the shoulder to the elbow as from the elbow to about the middle of the hand. And that proportion gives us a baseline, though people vary according to how they stand and how they move, and actual some minute variations in the length of the bones themselves. But the S-curve gesture that we talk about in the figure actually comes from the bones and muscles themselves. But to draw it, we have to have a visual concept to be able to do that. Some simple ideas about setting up that structure. The arm hanging, just relaxed, has an S-curve, and it comes from the connection to the body, the trunk, at the clavicle, and the scapula, and the bones of the upper arm, the bones of the forearm, the bones of the hand, the humerus, the radius, the ulna, the tarsals and metatarsals, the carpals and metacarpals in the hand, the tarsals in the foot, all respond to this movement of the arm and the bones of the arm moving in an S-curve. The shape structures are like other shape structures in the body. They're tapered rectangles. If we go from the shoulder and the deltoid to the base where it joins the elbow, and we get the ulna moving gracefully from that point to the end of the radius, which joins with the hand, and creates a beautiful structure in its own right, which we'll talk about in a moment. We have these two tapered, interlocking, and overlapping rectangular structures. We have a triangle at the wrist, we have a block at the hand, and we'll talk about hands and wrists in another video. And then from there, we modify this to create the contours of the muscles, the high-low points, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Excuse me. And we begin to have the forms of the arm as it moves in its simplest possible form. The gesture of the arm can move in a great variety of ways. Just hanging at the side of the figure, at the side of the torso. And here's the neck and head, the rib cage here, and the pelvis, the pubis symphysis, which again is the halfway point in the figure. The arm, depending on whether it's rotated inward or outward, it can always exhibit an S-curve. And this S-curve is the primary structure that we have to understand first. It just doesn't hang straight. And as the arm of the figure moves in different poses, and I'll just draw over this to make continuous movements, we find that the gesture changes, but it's always moving in an S-curve. The structural shapes of the arm, going back to the idea of those rectangular blocks, are always tapered from wider, we say proximally towards a large joint, to narrower. And then where it connects with another form, it's momentarily wider again, and then it tapers again to the point where it joins another structure. And in this case, it would be the hand at the base of the radius and the ulna. This structural shape then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier or alluded to, then becomes modified by the curvatures, the high-low points of the different muscle groups. And these can change visually, depending on the perspective of the model, the foreshortening of the model, and we'll talk about foreshortening in another video. But here, I'm emphasizing the high-low points. One of the beautiful elements of the arrangement of the muscles through the body is they're all in opposition to each other. They move from high to low points. So for example, the deltoid emerges from its attachments to the clavicle and around the scapula on a diagonal where it dips in and then joins into the bone of the humerus between the bicep and the tricep. The bicep, coming from its attachments on the scapula and at the head of the humerus, then has a low, heavy volume relative to a higher, slightly leaner volume of the tricep. The radial muscles, which rotate our hand, are high relative to the flexor, the heavy underbelly of the forearm, which is low. And we can find these movements throughout, and the gesture of the muscles themselves are constantly fluidically moving through the figure. There is a constant set of lines of movement that one can trace throughout the figure, and these high-low points then activate the whole image so that there's a sense of dynamic movement and fluidity. Depending on the position of the arm, the pose that the model might have, we will find variations on this. So here is an arm that is turned up and outward. Here's the pit of the elbow. Here's the forearm. And then here's the hand open in what we think of as a supine position, as opposed to a prone position. Prone, the hand is overturned and closed. Supine, the hand is open. And we see these variations then of the gesture lines moving within this from high to low points as we then approach the hand, the base of the ulna and the radius. And then to add shading to this, we can modulate the internal volumes of the muscles themselves. We'll talk about the connections of them in foreshortening and how these shapes overlap each other. But just keep in mind, without having time to go into a lot of the anatomy of this and why it is the way it is, that the arm, like the leg, moves in S curves no matter what position the arm is in, and that will enliven and invigorate your gesture drawings. And the gesture drawings then will be so much better by understanding then also the high-low points throughout the movement of the hand. And here in foreshortening, we get into a whole other realm of discussion, which I'll go over in just a moment. The legs have a similar situation. If we take a look at the gesture of a figure, the legs carry the gesture, and just as the arms do, and in this simple kind of moving stick figure, we can see how that the legs are moving backwards, forwards, and backwards, down and forward, just as the arm is moving backwards, down and forward, up and forward, and always in an S curve. The legs, of course, as a discussion about balance, are an easy way to check your plumb line. Where are the feet below that plumb line? And you can place that plumb line anywhere throughout the figure at all and see what's immediately below it, as long as you're moving in a very straight vertical line. And that helps us from getting our figures to look like, quote, they're falling over. They're standing properly. The structures individually of the limb is very much like the arm. If I draw a pelvic shape and I create the gesture of the limb, then the shapes of the leg, tapered rectangles. The knee is a particular kind of structure. That's a trapezoidal block. And then the calf, a full volval, the lower shaft of the lower limb, and then joining the foot, which we'll talk about also in another video. The quadriceps move high and forward. The bicep femoris group, which is made up of two large muscles with different names, but that's another topic, is low and back. The trapezoidal form of the transition through the knee makes that beautiful transition. And like the wrist, the knee has been made much of in drawings over the centuries as a beautiful shape. Then the calf as a backward moving oval volume. And then once again, the whole movement continues down and forward where it meets the structure of the foot. And so we have this forward and backward setup of the structure. And this is true in the arm as well. So we're always looking for that, as opposed to what many people do when they begin, which is to have one form in the body right above another form. And it makes the figure look much more like a stick figure without any movement. The leg in any view is going to present as a variety of these balanced S curves. And The structural shapes can be laid out quite simply based on the pose of the model. And they then can be, just like in the arm, they can be modulated with their high-low points of the muscle groups themselves. The calf is high in the back, the shin long and lean and low in the front, quadriceps high in the front, the bicep of the thigh low in the back, and likewise on the opposite leg. The shin carries a beautiful gesture line of its own, the line of the tibia. And we've often used the line of the tibia coming through the muscles of the quadriceps and down into meet the foot. And this is another gesture, which is a whole other discussion that has to do with the muscles and the separation of the inner thigh muscles, the quadriceps by sartorius, and the separation of the long muscles of the shin, the extensors, separated from the calf of gastrocnemius and soleus of the lower leg. But that's another discussion. But for the visual parts of all this, just to do a little bit more complete drawing, just to tie all this together, I'll start with my simple gesture structure of a pose: shoulder tilt, pelvic tilt, a gesture of an arm, a gesture of an arm, knee, knee, foot. And then I'll work on my contrapposto of my large central forms and the upward and forward projecting head on the neck. And then what I can do is begin to create my shapes of the arm, those tapered rectangular shapes, and then move down to the leg to do something very similar. Create my knee block as a transition. Here's my shin line, calf, and down to the foot itself. Shin line. And I begin to have then, with the modulation of the high-low points and the actual contours of the drawing, the complete understanding of the simplified structures of these limbs. This is not meant to be a video about the exact and precise anatomy. It's more meant to be a conceptual discussion about how you can actually lay out and understand what you're seeing, and to give us new points of reference to look for when we're actually drawing. So this is, in a way, the kind of thing that a person can actually start with without knowing really any anatomy at all, except that it exists and it can be understood gradually after we begin to understand these simplified constructs of the figure in general. I hope that's helpful and informative, and will lead to better and stronger drawings. Thank you very much.
So there's a few things in part one about a different part of the body, the arms and legs. Does anyone have any questions?
Al, I just want to say you make it look so easy.
Well, it's not easy. It's based on learning these things and then practicing. That's all it is. It's also not rocket science. It's not about some great talent. It's none of that. It's about simply learning these few visual things and then practicing them repeatedly. And you can do that in the croquis classes at Fleisher. and learn about these things and see how they work and get used to it. So anyway, any questions about anything at all?
One question came up for me. And maybe it was a question for other people. Can you explain a little bit what the plumb line is?
Yeah, the plumb line is, simply put, if you look at a figure, a human form, or any form, could be a tree, and you hold up a vertical line like a ruler and you drop it straight down, you will see how the forms depart from that straight line, and that will help you lay out the figure or the tree or the building properly. What's to the right, what's to the left. In terms of the figure, it means where is the balance so that the figure doesn't feel like it's falling over. One of the common problems people often have is that they will draw the figure very carefully, and then the feet and the legs will be off balance and the figure feels like it's going to fall over. By simply taking a moment during your drawing to check your plumb line, how far back is the heel of one foot, how far is another relative to that plumb line, then you will get the perfect balance of the figure and it won't feel like it's going to fall over.
Val has a question about the plumb line as well. She's wondering what's the trick to getting a good one. She says hers is always coming out crooked.
Well, you have to, here I'll get I have a few of these antique rulers. They were from our school days. And so when I'm drawing the model, I just hold this up straight and I see what lines above. So using a straight edge, like a pencil, a ruler, anything at all, really helps you. It's a very practical, simplistic kind of approach to checking the plumb line. And that way it'll be straight. In the previous videos a couple weeks ago when I was with you, I noticed that my plumb lines were tilted. And that's because I'm right-handed. And so my tilts of my plumb lines were a little off kilter. And I thought, oh, damn, that's because I'm right-handed and I draw diagonally very often. But when you're trying to get it really straight, you have to just use something and get it really perfectly straight, and then it will work. Because the natural tendency, like we do cursive writing, is to write, whether it's right or left-handed, write on a diagonal. And you have to catch yourself so that you don't do that.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Dicky is wondering what drew you to drawing the human form. They're always drawing landscapes.
Well, I don't see it as much different. I am a landscape painter, as many of you know, as well as a figure and a portrait painter. And to me, all of the elements are the same in that I'm dealing with shapes, I'm dealing with forms, I'm dealing with value and tonality. So the figurative work that I do, I think about it much the same way, compositionally and structurally, as the other things I do. What led me personally, though, to the figure is I simply love the sensuous forms of the human body. And so if any of you have seen my figurative work, they're very much about the volumes, the light and shade, the texture, but actually that's not that much different from the landscape or the still lifes that I do. They're really very close. So my own personal love of the figure, though is the sensuality of the figure. I just really love that. And I'll tell you a little quick story. The first nude I ever saw in art history was in 4th grade in Catholic school. And one of the nuns had us paste a postcard of a great artwork in a journal every week. And the first nude I ever saw was Egyptian art. They were naked figures. So I have to thank the Franciscan nuns in Peoria, Illinois for that. But to me, though, the concepts, the structural concepts, the synthetic and the conceptual ideas are all the same.
Fascinating. I love the nun story. That's amazing.
Listen, there's a lot of stories about, all that, but frankly, yeah, I get all the drama about all that. But the ones I had in Peoria, Illinois, they were really lovely people and helped me become the artist I am today. So I'm really grateful to them. I am.
We're really grateful to them.
Well, thank you. Any other questions real quick?
I think you touched upon, but one of the last questions was, are there similarities between landscape and the human form?
Yes, there are, because the volumes of the landscape are organic ovoid volumes for the most part. And the landscape involves perspective and the three-dimensional ovoid volumes of hills, of trees, masses of plants, perspective, foreshortening. So it's really all the same concepts. And it works extremely well when we get all those things organized together. Could you say more about the S shape, not a literal S it means, just a curving, sorry. Yes, the S shape, what it means is that all the bones and the muscles in the body, whether it's animals, humans, or in fact trees, move in S curves. So the S curve is the most common form in all organic bodies. With the figure, what happens is it's not only a flat visual S curve, but in addition, the forms spiral around like a double helix in S curve. So all the volumes of the body, or say a tree, how the branches connect to each other, are all moving diagonally. And then if you see them flat, you could put tracing paper over a photo and see them all as flat S curves. But if you're looking at it spatially, the volumes of those branches are also moving diagonally, spiraling like a double helix. And so therefore the S curve is the unitive form, the unitive movement in all organic forms, including amoebas. Any other quick questions before we move to the next video? No? Okay, I'm going to screen share. And this one is about arms and legs. And I'm going to make it vertical. Sorry, I meant to say hands and feet. There we are. I'm sorry. Sorry for that.
Hey everyone, this is Gury. Today I'd like to talk about drawing of hands and feet, something that often gets neglected. I have to admit that as a student, I was scared of drawing hands because they were so complex and I never thought I'd get it right. But I discovered that there were certain things that really worked well. First of all, remembering that the gesture of the arm is what carries the structure ultimately to the hand. This is a wrist, the head of the radius and ulna, which comes together. And by the way, I don't want to spend a lot of time in this video on anatomy. That's a larger, separate topic. But the structural forms of the limbs can be understood very, very well just by taking a look at their shapes and landmarks. And what I've done with this sketch is done the primary placement of the structure of an arm. And the key landmarks would be the tilt of the shoulder, the elbow, and the wedge turn of the wrist, which is created by the radius and the ulna. And then the blocked shapes, wider at the joint, narrower to the next joint of the arm. But the key for the hand is that the hand itself can be described as a structural shape. Its proportions are fairly simple. If we took two squares, added an isosceles triangle with a hook, we have the shape of a hand. And the arm cutting into it, from that wedge turn, I like to call it, of the radius and the ulna. Beyond this, we can add at the halfway point and above the line of the knuckles, and we can break out the shapes of the fingers within this, the index finger, the two middle fingers, which lie relatively parallel to each other, and then the little finger, which is the shortest of all. Both it and the index finger spring out from the shape of the hand and the two middle fingers. They have particular functions. The index finger is literally an indicator, and it has to be able to move up and down at will to be able to point and do various other things. The little finger is basically a support to the hand, just the way a truss or a support for a large earth-moving machine often has struts that come out to support it so it doesn't fall over. Well, the little finger and the little toe do those things. So here's my basic structure of the hand. But the real key for the hand, coming off the gesture of the arm, is what is the shape of any given pose in that hand. And that can be broken down by, once again, just focusing on the simplified shapes and then describing the drums of the phalanges. I'm going to pop two fingers up here to be able to show gesture and movement within the hand. And this would be the thumb, which, by the way, is quite short. And unlike the rest of the phalanges of the hand, it only has two segments of bone rather than three that the others all have. And the reason for that is that shortness facilitates its powerful gripping ability. This view of the hand, here's the knuckles, and the fingers, I'm bending them down and turning them back and under. So I'm laying out this hand from its heel to its knuckles to its phalanges as it bends. The hand can be drawn literally in any shape, in any pose, based on having a really simple understanding of what those shapes do and how they're laid out. And like croquis, we would do hands over and over, not focusing on details, but focusing on the very simplified shapes. And that's the thing that's confusing to many people, because they look at hands, they see them as very elaborate and very detailed, and actually their shape structure is extremely simple. The additional part of this is that the arcing lines show the vaulting over the forms, whether it's the body of the hand made up of the carpals or it's the phalanges. And the fingers themselves are all drums which recede in space, and they overlap or they underlap depending on the perspective that you have in the pose. And that shows their recession in space. So in many ways, they are a perfect example of what foreshortening is. But it's the key to this whole thing is getting the structural shape of them. The fingers, the drums of the phalanges, 1, 2, 3, with the nail at the end, the creasing where it joins the hand, and then the large bony knuckle of each finger is typical. And as I just mentioned, the overlapping or the underlapping shows the correct perspective of each finger. So a more complete drawing of a hand might have its shape first, its finger layout, its heel, its radius and ulna, its knuckle line. And then I would sequentially break it down, each according to its length and proportion to the whole, the fingers. The middle finger is the longest and the straightest. The fourth finger is somewhat straight and lies parallel to that middle finger and not quite as long as the middle finger. The index finger pops up because of stronger tendons on both top and bottom, whereas the rest of the fingers, especially 3 and 4, are meant for gripping and curling under. The little finger has some sideways latitude more easily. And the thumb, of course, the opposable thumb, can move in all kinds of directions. So their proportions are pretty standard, though the beauty of variety within the hand in many, many, many different people is extraordinary. And as an artist, I particularly love looking at how people's hands are structured, and also the nails, which move over the form of those drums. And the nails will have a somewhat rectangular feel. They will sometimes be more oval. They will be flattened. They will be narrower. They will be wider. It depends on the structure of the person. And the tips of the fingers will tilt up. They might tilt down. They might be wider and fleshier, or they might be very tapered, and with every kind of variety within that range. Very, very interesting and beautiful. The feet have a very similar kind of structure, whereas the hand is primarily a rectangle divided in half with the isosceles triangle of the thumb. The foot can be seen as either a large, again, isosceles triangle, or it can be seen as a trapezoid from the front, and this would be the side. The ankles sit on the diagonal on top of the foot. And just as the hand is divided in half, the foot is divided in half as well, with half of the foot being the tarsals and the other half of the foot being the metatarsals and the phalanges, which create the toes. In this layout of the front, the big toe can have its own shape, and the small toes can have their own shape, and then we can break them down with the little toe being the smallest, often set back slightly, and the big toe being the largest form. Toes, like hands, vary tremendously. The smaller toes can be longer than the big toe, they can be shorter. They have all the same characteristics as the fingers in terms of the nail, the fleshiness, the tapering. They are all very much the same. And it has its own set of wonderful forms within the large knuckles of the foot, the body of the foot, which is made up of the tarsals and metatarsals. The toes have the same number of phalanges as the fingers, the big toe having only two, and the nails follow the forms just as they do in the hand. Any given view of the foot can be described pretty directly by getting its shape. Here, from heel to angle of toes, I can describe the heel as closest to me, the Achilles tendon, the ankles, high on the inside, low on the outside, the vault of the body of the foot, and then the side of the foot lying on the ground. And we can go on to describe the toes moving back in space. So any given view of the foot has the same qualities of shape and needs to start with its shape, including coming off of the gesture of the leg. Here, the femur, the knee, the shin, the ankles, high on the inside, low on the outside, to the shape of the foot. And then I can add the structural shapes of the thigh, the calf, and move on down to the toes. And I have my basic movement, but it's all a whole construction. It can't be separated from the gesture. It also can't be separated from the half and half proportions. A hand is about 3/4 the length of a human head, and a foot can be anywhere from the same size to very large, actually longer than the length of a human head, depending on the size of the person and their foot size. So they do vary, but they do have the commonality, like the hands and like the rest of the body, of being able to be organized according to some very basic, simple kinds of gestural and shape movements. And I'm going to finish with two drawings that hopefully will be helpful. The fingers always move down because they're mostly in a gripping mode, though of course they can move around quite a lot, especially the index finger and the small finger. And the foot, I'm going to do something simple and direct in terms of its shape. And get this shape laid out. I'm going from nearer to farther, which actually makes perfect sense in terms of depth and proportion. And I'm going to suggest my phalanges. I'm going to suggest the nails on this foot, the side of the foot, the ankles, the volume of the body of the foot, the heel of the hand, a little shading around the fingers and the arm. And I'm going to finish with some touches of highlights because after all, the phalanges are also providing us with planes or facets which show the direction and the form of the individual segments of the hand. The light will be on the high places and especially on the topmost planes that are facing towards the light. And this is true in drawing the whole figure. And one of the wonderful things about this in drawing all this is that there is some amazingly beautiful organization to it all. Even though the diversity and variety is incredible and amazingly beautiful around the world, and even within our own families. So what I would recommend doing is do croquis of the hands and feet purely as gestural shapes and focus on capturing that portrait quality of the hands and feet, and then think about the details, which would be the overlapping and underlapping creases, shading around the knuckles, the indications of the webbing between the fingers, and then finally shapes of nails and toenails, fingernails and toenails as they move over the hand and the foot. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
So there's a little bit of something. It was a lot. I understand. This is Sammy, by the way. He's my wingman. And
Such a good wingman. He's so cute.
he is. He's so sweet.
Beautiful ginger.
After the horrible fire of 3 years ago, which many of you know about, I adopted a new family of kitties, and Sammy was the first one. Real art cat. I hope that was useful. I'm looking at some of the questions. When you're sketching a model and you don't have a lot of time to do the detailed hand in entirety, which parts do you focus on to give a suggestion of the hand, and which planes are the most important? What I would recommend is that it's the shape. In some of those drawings I did, you saw the gesture of the arm and then the shape of the hand with the shape of the fingers as a simple group. If you can do that, that's all you need to do, because the whole story will be told at that point. The details are the addition, but after that, it's that simple. If you look at the drawings of, say, Ang, or if you look at the drawings of Rembrandt, an open form Rembrandt, a closed form, which means more line drawing in Ang, more tonality in Rembrandt, you're going to see the same thing. It's the mass, the simple shape coming from the gesture. And if you have that, it will tell the whole story. Any other questions right now about anything that I can help you with? Nothing right now. I want to show you one more thing, and let's see. These are drawings that I've done that show different aspects of, whoops, come on, you can do it, the structure. This is the wedge turn of the hand. What this is is the round roll of the radius, and it makes a wedge turn that is a transition between this and the shape of the hand. And dovetailing on that question that someone posted about how much do you need? If you have this coming from the gesture of the arm and the wedge turn of the wrist, you've got it. That's basically all that needs to happen there. Here's another version of this.
Al, we didn't see
Sharing
that,
your
the
screen.
first one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if we could see the first one more time, that would be great.
I'm sorry. There we go. There we go. Okay. Here it is. I'm very sorry. The screen sharing thing, I always forget about screen sharing. Can you see that now?
Yes, that's
Good.
perfect.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Here's the wedge turn of the wrist, and here's the block and gesture of the hand. So if you have those elements coming off this big S-curve gesture of the hand, you've got it. I have tons of these. I can even send some to Vita if she wants to post them, but you can see the high-low points, the gesture of the arm, this is another good example of the gestures moving off of the figure. And so the two things that I think, in my experience of understanding the history of life drawing for the last 500 years, is that what is common to all is the gestural form and then the particular shapes that move along that gestural form. This hand is really simplified, but yet it captures exactly what was doing. To me, the detail and the shading and all of that is gravy on top. The important part of learning all this is focusing on, in your croquis sketches, and this is why I love croquis class at Fleisher, is because if you go in there and you focus on these basic underlying structures, you've got the basis of everything that Ang did, Delacroix did, Sargent did, Rembrandt did. You've got the basis of the whole thing. It's the organizational underlying structures that really give us the figure and have it make sense. The high-low points are essential. And when you translate it into painting, for example, this is one of my oil studies of a model I did at PAFA for my students. The axial tilts, the simple gesture line, the proportions, the high-low points, this arm in a moving gesture captures all the things that we were talking about. And hopefully, if you focus on those things, you will be able to enhance your drawing, improve your drawing tremendously. I mentioned a few times that the idea of studying anatomy is, I think, a little bit separate. A person can learn a lot about anatomy fairly quickly, but the problem with studying anatomy for the figure is if you don't understand the underlying structures that we just talked about, it's not going to make sense. I know people who know a lot of anatomy, but their drawings are not necessarily very alive because of that. What they're missing is they're not adding all of these other elements to it. So finally, my recommendation would be going forward, if you could focus on your croquis and those underlying structures and gestures and high-low points, and then those overlaps, then you will be able to do almost any kind of style of figure drawing you want to do. And I don't spend time teaching a particular style. I know a lot of artists who do that. I don't do that. I want my students to understand how do you manage all these underlying things, and then as adults you can work out, you can decide on the style you want to pursue. Looking at a couple more questions. Will we have this recording up in a few days on YouTube? I think Vita's taking care of that. When you're sketching,
we will have the recording in a couple of days, and you can just search the YouTube channel for Fleisher Art Memorial and Al Gury, and both of the sessions will come up as recordings.
Thank you, Vita.
Absolutely. Al, thank you so much. We're at 7:30, so I don't want to keep you too much longer.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Al, this was really terrific. It's always just mesmerizing watching you work and making it seem just so easy to do. And I know how hard it is and how much practice it takes. So phenomenal. Thank you so much. Nice to meet your cat as well.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to let everyone know Al does teach at Fleisher in the summertime. So he will be back this summer for an online class in portrait painting.
Yes.
That's great.
The
Yeah.
schedule for that will come out in a couple of weeks. Look out for that. Registration starts May 10th. Otherwise, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Al, there's a lot of thank yous and wonderful workshop and awesome coming in the chat. You're amazing. We love you. We love to have you here at Fleisher. Thank you all for joining us. Join us again next week on Thursday. We'll be doing a short or small frame weaving demonstration. So if you're into fibers, take advantage. It'll be fun. Register ahead of time. And Al, thank you.
Thank
again.
you.
Okay.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Can
Bye,
we
Vita.
bring
Bye.
bring
Bye-bye.
the cat?
Bye, Al.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.